Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Reason Heretic, and thank you again for subscribing. And you can now find me also on X or Twitter at Reason Heretic. So today I have with me Mo Latif, who is, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but he's got a scientific research background, PhD in chemistry from the University of London, specializing in the I can't even say that, something to do with polypeptides. And he also developed daptomycin, which was a new antibiotic when it was launched in 2004. So today we're going to be talking about the net zero agenda. Net zero, a term, it was popularized after the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a UN body which published its special report on global warming in 2018. So the term net zero describes a situation where emissions of CO2 due to human activities are balanced out by its removal, or supposedly due to human activities, which is what we're going to discuss, are balanced out by its removal from the atmosphere in a given period of time. And the UK government was very quick off the mark to trailblaze on the new catchphrase net zero. So in 2019, government introduced new regulations. They modified the already existing Climate Change Act 2012, and now UK is required by legislation to reduce its emissions of greenhouse gases by 100% relative to 1990 levels by 2050. So Mo, as a scientist, obviously with a background in data evaluation and modeling, why are you skeptical about the effects of humans on the climate through to emissions? And indeed, what's your view on our ability, if at all, to affect the climate?
Yes, thanks, Alex, for having me on to your excellent channel, which I'm enjoying very much so far. This net zero agenda has been signed up by in principle, by the whole world, by 192 countries through the UN's committee IPCC. The reason I'm skeptical or becoming more active in opposing this agenda is that it's getting to the state where it's affecting everybody's lives and how the world economies work. And I think it's now time to actually think about this whole issue in a more rational basis. I'm not skeptical about humans affecting the climate. The human effect on climate is real, but it's tiny and it's in the background of natural change. And we need to look at the effect properly through what I came across Alex Epstein after he wrote his first book in 2014 about fossil fuels.
So who is Alex Epstein? Just so we...
Yeah, Alex Epstein is a philosopher who he's a new guy on the block, really. He comes from the Ayn Rand school of philosophy, which is sort of an objectivist philosophy. And really, it's quite simple. We can get sort of bogged down in terms, but it's basically, if you're looking at something that's crucial, complex, confusing, and controversial, then if you apply objectivist philosophy, which is basically a clarity of thinking to those very difficult situations, which climate change and net zero definitely are, it helps you think more clearly about decisions that the world is taking. And I think that the world is taking decisions which are going to negatively impact civilizations effectively.
So what are the two principles that Alex Epstein was proposing or recommending that scientists take when they are approaching any subject? I think one was something to do with considering both the negative and the positive side, and the other one was the importance of precision. Am I right?
You are right. When this approach is applied to net zero and climate change, he says that what the zeitgeist, the thinking in world culture amongst everybody is it's a negative context. It's biased and sloppy. And what we need a full context way of thinking, where we look at everything in an even-handed and more precise way. The example he gives is that Al Gore, in his Inconvenient Truth video, he said that the world sea levels would rise by 20 feet in the near future. And when you look at the IPCC of that same year report, they said that sea level would rise by zero point 0.6 feet to 2 feet over 100 years. Now, one is alarmist and the other is reasonable. The current sea level rises we're measuring are about 2 to 3 centimeters per decade. There's nothing to fear there. These are natural processes that have been going on thousands of years. So I think it's time now for us to push back against this green agenda because they're getting so powerful because of the amount of money involved
So
that they're
just
going to
before
affect
we,
our life.
I mean, I completely agree on the point of precision because often people talk about the climate and climate change in very emotive terms, but they don't actually look at the figures. Taking that philosophical approach, looking at precision, well, first of all, only 0.04% of the Earth's atmosphere is CO2. Any changes would be very small changes to something that's already very small. And then the question is, well, how much is human activity actually responsible for CO2 emissions? And the estimates I've seen range from about 3% from people who are very skeptical to about 33%, one third for people who are more sort of quote unquote mainstream. But UK is only responsible for about 1%. So once you multiply those small percentages, you end up getting something very minuscule and get net zero. If we could stop producing CO2 at all, I mean, what would the actual impact of that be? But on the flip side, and I think this is what you're about to discuss, Mo, is if we did do that, effects on everything that is produced through fossil fuels that it underlies our civilization. Our homes are not only energy itself, but the transportation of energy, the storage of energy, transported, our clothing, our infrastructure, our roads, the tarmac, healthcare system, and medicines. All this is dependent on hydrocarbon derivatives of oils and so forth. So if we just really cut down on that, we would end up in a situation of real poverty and stagnation economically.
Yes, I fully agree with you. Going back to the figures, yes, uh, we're roughly at about 420 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. It's actually the life of gas. It's the gas of life. It's responsible for all life on this planet, and it's an essential component of our atmosphere. The UK's contribution, as you say, is only 1% of the increase, which is, as you say, between 3 and 33%. But it's more complex than even that because the CO2 in the atmosphere is in a big cycle. The oceans absorb it and release it depending on how much heat they receive from the sun. There's a carbon cycle where plants draw this in and grow, and are then subducted or taken away, eaten or buried. So the carbon is taken out of the atmosphere. It's a very complex process, and it's actually not been scientifically proven that increases in CO2 cause huge climate changes. It is a tiny component. The big changes in climate are coming from the activity of the sun or changes in the Earth's orbit, cloud formation. Humans are having an impact, but it is tiny.
But
And
putting the devil advocate here a little bit, people who are concerned about climate change would argue, well, if you look at the increase in dioxide in its concentration in the atmosphere, the rate at which it's accelerated, so from if you look at figures from 1960 when it was about 315 parts per million to the current day when it's about 410 parts per million, that's about a 30% increase. And if you look at that that growth, that rate, that correlates quite closely, doesn't it, with increasing human activity, increasing industrial output, and fossil fuel use? So that would suggest, like, I know that correlation doesn't prove causation, but that would suggest, wouldn't it, that humans are responsible for that increase?
the proof that the IPCC has for this is based on a study by Dr. Professor Michael Mann. It's
Mm.
called the famous hockey stick
Yeah.
graph. And what that hockey stick, I mean, there's lots of disputes about how scientifically based that hockey stick graph is, but the general consensus, I suppose, worldwide is that it's true. Now, what that is, it's looking at the global mean surface temperature of the world going back from about 1,000 years to the current point. And what that graph does, it sort of stays flat until we get to the 1950s when real fossil fuel use increased after the Second World War, and then you get this peak, which looks like the blade of the hockey stick going straight up. And what that is, it's the increase over the global mean surface temperature, which is at 15 degrees, that Michael Mann says, for about 1,000 years. And in the last sort of 60, 70 years, the uptick of that 15 degrees has gone up by about 1.5 degrees. This is the Paris Agreement to limit it to 1.5 degrees. It's actually a little bit less. So that is the evidence that's been used behind this net zero agenda. And that graph is being disputed by lots of scientists.
On what grounds are they disputing it?
Right, the main problem is that he uses tree ring data
Mm,
from 1,000 years ago to the middle of the 50s, and then the tree ring data doesn't support the hockey stick. So what he then does is uses instruments, thermometer reading, to take that up. And with the thermometer readings that we have all over the globe, we have what's called a heat island effect.
yeah.
Thermometers were discovered between the 1700s and 1800s at the turn of that century, turn of the 18th century. And they were placed out in fields, and there was not many towns and cities grown up by then. But over the years, towns and cities have grown up, and we have one. You know, most of them now are near airports. They're
Yeah.
in huge amounts of concrete has been built around these things. Now they do correct them. I will say they do correct these figures. The figures they get from these thermometers, they correct them with so they already know that they're measuring the heat because of the heat island effect. Also, the globe is not very well covered with these thermometers, and historically, there's hardly any in Africa. Longest record is in the UK, which goes back to the thermometers were discovered. But the greatest concentration of thermometers is actually in the northern United States. And when you look at that thermometer data, it doesn't match the hockey stick. This is the major flaw. It's well known that in the 1930s, with a
So
dust.
hang on, because you previously you were saying that the problem was that they moved from dendrochronology, from using the tree ring data to using thermometer data post 1958 or whenever it was, and that was the issue, that it was inconsistently sourced data, and so you're almost sort of comparing apples with pears to an extent. But now you're saying actually that the problem is that the thermometers as well, and not only where they're placed, but that they're inaccurate. So that would seem to suggest that it's just unreliable data, wouldn't it, to me?
It is actually, and Michael Mann admits this. The error bars are huge, absolutely huge, and they're trying to measure a change of 1 degree or 1.5 degrees in the global mean surface, and the error bars are like zero point 0.8 of a degree. They're huge. They're nearly at the scale of the measurement they're trying to make.
Yeah.
He also uses what's called principal component analysis, which is a statistical way of trying to get a trend in a data set where an obvious trend is not easy to spot. Now, this is used wildly in multivariate analysis in science. I mean, we don't need to get into it's getting a bit technical
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
But what people say is, if you use that method, you're going to find a trend in almost any data that you put in,
Yeah.
because that's what it's designed to do. It's another sort of
Yeah.
a blow to Michael Mann's hockey stick.
Yeah. Basically, you can find trends in anything if you look hard enough. So, what do you think, Mo? What do you think of the incentives? Why is net zero being pushed by the government, and why is it being pushed by the international establishment organizations? What are the incentives behind it?
I can give you two main reasons. The first one is that good scientists who think that the world is getting better because of fossil fuels have let the green agenda take a hold. And so the first answer is that it's got such a big hold now, the amount of money involved now. Green net zero and the IPCC and these COP people are the companies behind bringing renewable energies to the fore are dealing with trillions of dollars a year, hundreds of trillions of dollars a year. It's huge money and it's sort of snowballed itself. It's become circular and it's going to be difficult to stop. Now, what I really like about, I mentioned Alex Epstein earlier, is we need to attack it from the philosophical point of their reasoning. And what he says is the Green Lobby looks at nature as a delicate nurturer. It's stable, safe, and sufficient, and we mustn't impact it. But really, the best way to look at nature is that it's, which is what Alex Epstein, it's wild potential. It's dynamic. It's just dangerous and deficient. And so we've looked at the planet, and then he says, look at humans. Now, humans, by the green agenda, are looked at as polluter parasites. So we are parasites on this beautiful, nurturing planet, and we're polluting it. But humans are actually, we're actually perfecter producers, taken what in reality is not a delicate, nurturing planet. It's actually a wild, it's a dynamic, dangerous place to live. And humans have made it better to live on by being perfecter producers. So we're producing more, we're living better, we're making the planet far better for humans to live on. Instead of people thinking that all humans are parasites on the planet,
Yeah.
we are actually the perfecters and producers of this planet.
Yeah,
Uh,
I agree. I think on the one hand, yes, we have to conserve, and there is an important, case for conservation because we are on a planet, and yes, we're getting energy from the sun, but our resources are finite. I mean, that is a objectivist reality. But on the same time, yes, you're right. Nature is can be savage, and I think that from a philosophical perspective, a lot of the eco warriors have this very idealistic view of idyllic view of nature that doesn't really match the landscape of fact. Because I'm very interested in sort of what's driving this, and it's often a case of Kibona who follow the money. Obviously, as you say, there's a huge green subsidy industry really where massive corporates get the tax breaks from quote unquote green energy. And when you get for example manufacturers and installers and providers who use wind turbines, what they often fail to look at, of course, is the shelf life, and they fail to factor in. They maybe say, well, actually, you're getting energy from wind, of course, only when the wind blows. Fortunately, today it's quite stormy, so we're getting a lot of wind, but we can have another day when there's no wind at all. Have they factored in the carbon costs of manufacturing those wind turbines? And what about the shelf life? Because one day they'll need to be replaced. And what about the the whether or not they're biodegradable? Where's that waste going to be stored? So all these things are not necessarily factored in. The same thing goes for solar panels, of course, as well. And of course, there is, as you alluded to, there's that sort of consensus, and so it's very difficult to come in, particularly as a scientist, and challenge that because you're in danger of losing your reputation in your career if you speak out. I often, I have to say, I trust scientists who lose everything from speaking out. Rather than those who gain and get promoted by towing the line, because I always think, well, the former, those who speak out and lose everything and have nothing to gain, well, who do you think is more trustworthy in that situation? Um, but of course, the other problem, if you buy into the whole, climate change thing, and then buy into the argument that the government does need to take action, whenever you get the government involved in anything, there's always incompetency, there's always corruption. And so there was a case in 2020 where I think it was Northern Ireland, there erroneously set green subsidy levels for wind turbines at many multiples of the financial value of the energy that they generated. And it was quickly exploited by some eagle-eye opportunists, and ended up costing the taxpayer about £1.4 billion. And even the director of the Renewable Energy Foundation, a guy called Dr. John Constable, commented basically this era basically created a license to print money. And now you've got these 250 kilowatt turbines, and they've been obsolete for years, and no one would have built them at the time, except as for the loophole, the cash cow loophole that was exploited. So you get all these problems as well. On the international level, you've got UN Agenda 21 now, which now's really become UN Agenda 2030. The degrowth agenda, a lot of these are kind of depopulation, uh, 4-day week, working from home, rentalism, you'll own nothing and be happy, Klaus Schwab, LTNs, even low traffic in 15-minute cities, all this stuff is sort of creeping in, the social credit system, even if you want to go there. And I mean, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, Alex, you've that's a huge range of
It's
things.
I've already opened the Pandora's box there, haven't I?
We could talk for hours on this, but
Yeah.
I'd like to make a few points on the net zero and the renewable energies that you said.
Mm,
Because I think what's happening now is that the green agenda is coming so far forward into our lives, it's actually hitting reality.
mm,
We've seen that countries that rely on the most renewable energies, like Germany, the UK, some of the European countries, have the highest electricity prices in the world.
yeah.
Everybody says to you, it's free wind energy, it's free solar energy, it's the cheapest form of energy, but it's intermittent. Intermittent, you cannot, if wind blowing and there's no sunshine, what is the cost of your electricity when you haven't got any? How much are you willing to pay for it? But if you were deprived of food, how much would you be willing to pay for that food? Do you know what I mean? All of a sudden, everything gets very expensive. Now we're finding that heavy industry in the UK has been shut down. The car industry in Germany is in big trouble because they're huge users of cheap, cost-effective, versatile energy, which comes mostly from fossil fuels. So this switch to renewables is now hitting reality, and we're finding our energy bills, our electricity and gas bills are now, by law, we're paying 15% of our bills as a green levy to subsidize these huge renewable projects. And the government is plowing billions and billions of pounds into these projects for intermittent, unreliable electricity. Now, without effective, efficient, reliable energy, civilization will stop. It's that serious. It's that serious. And when civilization stops, technical advances stop, because people are too busy trying to survive to be allowing universities to do some research and come up with new technological answers to the problems that we have. With enough energy, we could transform the planet. We could take the carbon dioxide out. If you believe that carbon dioxide is the control knob of climate, we will do it. Recently, our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has invested, or through Ed Miliband, hundreds of millions of pounds into a carbon dioxide removal experiment. And that's going to use huge amounts of energy to do it. Now, unless that energy is cheap, the whole thing is just a complete scam. It's just a waste of money. So this is right, and what it's doing
That's a
is
good point,
raising.
isn't it? Even to take out you need energy to take out energy. It's ironic, but everything requires energy, and so yeah, it's insane, really. It's completely insane. I mean, I think Ed Miliband's agenda is lunacy. It's driven by ideology.
Ideology. I mean, it's my opinion, from what sort of research I've done and sort of looked at why this is happening worldwide. I think it comes back to the failure of communism. So the socialist
Yeah.
thinking of communism, where you share wealth, equality, is shit. When communism failed in the Soviet Union after the Second World War, and also in China with the Great Leap Forward and everything, these socialist forces realized that they were onto a loser and that capitalism, market capitalism, was the real winner. But they despised it. They absolutely despised it. So what they did was they joined the Green movement, and
Yes.
slowly through the Green movement, they've taken over people like Greenpeace, who really wanted to stop nuclear weapons being uh,
Yeah.
uh, and then looking after some of the whales in the ocean, which was very noble causes. And then they penetrated that sort of green movement from the 60s, and they're now trying to stop capitalism. What they really want worldwide is they think we're overproducing things.
Yeah.
We're making life way too comfortable for everybody. People are getting too rich, and we must spread out the wealth.
Yeah,
Now,
I think you're right. So, and I think part of it is also one thing you haven't mentioned, like or socialists simply not wanting to work or being anti-work. But you're absolutely right, and very good to talk about the eco-socialist sort of takeover of organizations through Greenpeace, a move from Marxist ideology, sort of in terms of economics, into the social realm, but also the environmental realm. And I think, I mean, I was talking about the concept of degrowth, and I think even eco-socialists were reluctant for a long period to accept that because it's not attractive politically. I mean, to like the starvation, the death, the poverty that would be caused. Even now that's been adopted by some. In fact, actually, I was doing a bit of reading on this in October 2022. Three people, Jason Hickel, Georgios Kallis, and Julia Steinberger, were awarded 10 million euros by the European Commission for a project entitled Pathways Towards Post-Growth Deals. So they're actually starting now to, governments are starting to invest. It's very, very serious. Because, I mean, even Bill Gates, who's if we're cynical, sort of, pro reducing the population of the world. I think we can say that. But he has argued that degrowth is unrealistic, and asking people to consume less for the sake of the climate is going to be a losing battle, particularly with the emerging, well, now developing countries, China, India, and so forth. And so yeah, I mean it's a degrowth would, I mean, it would really be a great leap backwards, if you like, to draw on Mao Zedong's great leap forwards. And given great global poverty and infant mortality, then I mean, presently at their lowest levels in history, and it's really, really scary. I think on a philosophical basis, it's so I'm going to go into a bit of Freud, but Sigmund Freud sort of postulated that there were two drives. There's the eros and the thanatos, and the eros was the pro-life, the growth, spurring incentive for people. But there was a dark side. There was like the shadow side. So Freud was very much into the light side and the shadow side. We have a dark side of a personality. The dark side is thanatos, and that's that death drive. It's it's the shutting down, it's the depression, it's the turning in, it's the kind of breaking down. And effectively that's anti-life, that's sort of stagnation. And I see that in communist economics, which is effectively stagnation, as opposed to the market cyclical economy where you've got activity, dynamism. You've got, in communism, you've got stagnation, and I see that same thing there. And I think it's something that we just need to be very aware of, because it's infiltrated now into government, into policy making, thinking, and we've got to all be very awake to this, and so that we can push back. Thank you so much, Mo, for coming on, and for your time. It was really insightful getting your perspective on a lot of this, from the scientific perspective, because however well read I am, I can't claim to be a scientist, and so really appreciate it. And thanks very much for coming on. All right.
Thank you for having me on, Alex. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.